Welcome to the Bible Savvy Podcast, a weekly conversation about how to understand, enjoy, and apply God's Word. It's time to jump into a new passage from the Bible Savvy reading plan.
Hey everybody, I'm here with Pastor Courtney and Pastor David, and we're going to jump into a passage from the Bible Savvy reading plan. But David, I think you've got a question for us first.
That's right. This one comes on the heels of your refusal to tell people what our actual job titles are.
Your titles are too long.
They're too long. So but it would be important. It would be helpful for people to know what we do around the church every once in a while. And so this week's question is simply describe your job poorly.
Poorly.
Describe your job poorly.
That's description.
It's important.
What do you do, Courtney?
Well, I'm going to describe it poorly, and then I'll tell you what I actually do. Well, I'm going to tell you what I actually do.
You can guess at home if you don't know.
Poorly. So I recruit and train people to teach children how to live forever using an ancient text.
That works. Yeah.
Okay.
That's not that poor, actually. It's sort of accurate.
But if you heard that.
Yes.
If I told the person checking me out at Costco, that's what I do.
That's what I do.
Yes.
That's a little weird.
This is why the C and comma is important. Context matters. Yeah.
Context matters.
That's good.
Yes. All right, David.
That's
what
good.
do you do?
Okay. Mine sounds nothing like yours, but I did write mine down because I was like, okay, I got to think about this. And I've got a weird one because I've got a couple different things that I do around here. Okay.
Oh, did we actually say what you really do?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Do you want to leave it a mystery for a while, or should I just say
people probably know, but what's your actual job?
I'm the children's pastor.
That's
at the St. Charles South Elgin campus. So that's the long part.
Yes,
really.
Yes, it's the campus name.
It's really the campus name.
That's good.
Yeah,
David.
Okay, mine is this. I convince men to meet in circles and talk about their feelings. Yes. And part two, I help former teenagers embrace the sober realities of adulthood.
That's true. That's true. So he's the men's and young adults pastor.
Men's and young adults pastor.
In case you were at the St. Charles South Elgin campus.
Yes.
So he's got men's, young adults, St. Charles South Elgin. It's just a lot of words.
Yep.
We're just not calling it that.
I did have a bonus line that I was like, I could just say it this way, but I just do whatever Clayton Keenan tells me to do.
Oh, there we go.
Okay,
so this, I have a few different ones because I can't resist. Because I asked my children. I went to my kids, so my daughters helped me with this. One is 14, and one is she 11 yet? I don't know. I should know the age of my daughter. But so they're this is their perception of what I do. And my middle child was vicious. This is what she said. Bored adults watch you as you talk, walk around, and wave your arms frantically. That is what I do on the weekend.
Is she wrong?
But she said bored adults, which is the leading word was bored.
At least she didn't say something like, you put people to sleep.
Yeah,
on Sunday
mornings. Just wait. Okay. So then my 14-year-old, she said, you stand in front of thousands of people who stare at two giant screens that show your face instead of looking at you.
Oh.
So if you've ever been to our St. Charles South Elgin campus, I stand on a stage and then the people still just stare at the screens that are there.
Yeah.
And then my middle daughter, again, she says, you talk and talk and talk until the clock on the other side of the room tells you to stop, but you often ignore it.
Wow.
Oh, so
it's
savage.
Brutal. Okay, and then these are the other ones we came up with. I said, I try not to bore people while they stare at me for 40 minutes at a time when they could be sleeping in.
Okay.
So that's what happened.
Okay,
and then this one. After a sing-along, I convince people to do what a Bronze Age document tells them to do using dad humor and stories about my kids.
Oh, gosh.
And then I got one more. I'm sorry.
Wow.
I know we have a lot.
No, you did this well.
Here we go. I gotta pull this one up. I gotta
Clayton
find this.
understood the assignment.
This was fun. This was very fun. So I said, I'm a combination of a below-average stand-up comedian, a below-average scholar, and a below-average counselor, but God says you should listen to me.
Okay. I got to applaud it.
So,
I got to applaud.
So we had a good time with that. Being a pastor's weird.
And AI wasn't even involved. It was
AI was not involved.
Family
only my children being like, yeah, those adults are bored. I promise
you. That's good. That makes me want to ask my kids, who are much younger than yours, to see what they can come up with.
What do you think I do?
What do you think I do?
What do you think I do? All right, we are going to be in the book of Mark today. So we're in Mark chapter 5, and we'll start with a little bit of context here. Mark what is a gospel. So that means it's a biography of Jesus. It's a great place to start if you're reading the Bible for the first time. Lots of good stories about who Jesus is. We always recommend with context that you check out the Bible Project. They do these great videos, map out the whole thing, kind of give you some themes. It kind of helps you as you're reading along know what to pay attention to and kind of where you're at in the flow of the story. But let me give you just the two stories right before the one we're going to look at today, because I think it sets the scene really well. Jesus is kind of on a tour of an area of Israel, and as he's traveling around, these are the things that happens. He goes on a boat to cross the Sea of Galilee, and a storm comes up, and he calms the storm with a word. So that's the first story. The story right after that is on the other side of the sea. He meets a man who is possessed with a whole bunch of demons, and he's like out there in the tombs and going crazy, and no one can control him. And Jesus, with a simple conversation, casts out all the demons. Then Jesus comes back to the other side of the lake, the other side of the sea, and then this story happens. So it's these really powerful moments that lead up to this one. Okay, so we're going to read this. It's going to start in Mark chapter 5, verse 21. David, do you want to read it for us? Or Courtney's reading? You're the reader.
Professional reader.
I've been reading.
You're the reader. Okay.
Yes.
We're learning this. We're learning this. New jobs, new roles.
New jobs, new roles. All right. Mark 5, starting verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the little girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
All right, we're going to talk about the O in comma, which is observations. So we're going to talk about what we see here. It's good to get the details and to see what's going on here before we try to figure out all that it means. So what do you guys see?
First thing I noticed was that Jairus was a synagogue leader. I think oftentimes when you hear about religious leaders, when in a sermon on the weekend or in teaching, it's usually they're angry at Jesus, they're trying to accuse Jesus, they're trying to catch Jesus in a trap. But we have an example of a synagogue leader who comes to him believing that Jesus can do something. I don't know what he believes theologically about Jesus, but this is a desperate man at the end of his rope, and he's coming to Jesus, which I think is really interesting.
I wrote down, Mark is the king of something striking.
Yeah? What do you mean?
He just throws in those little things, right? He's like, just all the little details are there. He writes like a newspaper writer, right? It's like the just even the last line. He told them to give her something to eat. Like, where does that even come from? Why would you need to know that? Like little things that he adds in, little details that make the story really personal. But they're just these little pieces, these little like smoking guns almost. Like you're looking for these things that are clues or striking or
he does have little details that sometimes you say, where, like, why did he include that? You know, ancient writers weren't known for like, oh, I'm going to give you like the really descriptive thing so you can imagine it kind of thing. They were a little more sparse than that. Modern writers are like that. But he does have these little things where it's like he touched her or did this sort of thing and that kind of thing. I always think that the food at the end is funny because I'm like, man, being dead works up an appetite. You know, like it's like
get the girl some mac and cheese.
Like Jesus, after he raised from the dead, he was eating all the time. Like he was just everywhere, like cooking fish and doing stuff. It's
true.
Like maybe just dead people are hungry. You know?
To
But also just like, you know what? When a little girl wakes up, like the first thing is like, do you need some breakfast, honey?
Yeah.
You know, like,
are you hungry?
Are you hungry?
Yeah.
He does say, I was thinking the same thing, that he writes that the woman had been under the care of many doctors and spent all that she had. You know, it wasn't just like, oh yeah, she'd gone to doctors and she spent some money. It was many doctors, and she spent every penny trying to fix this thing. So I definitely observed the same thing.
Yeah, some of the like details we say, you could have left this out and we would have understood. Some of those things come, they may be evidence like that it's an eyewitness account, right? The reason Mark knew that is because Peter's saying, I was there. I was in the room. This is how it happened. And so some of those details only come because you've said, oh, tell me what it was like. And they just kind of wrote it down, that sort of thing. Another really interesting clue about the fact that this was from eyewitnesses, because Mark wasn't a disciple. He would have had to talk to somebody, is whenever there's a name that's included in an account, like in the Gospels or Acts, most scholars say the only reason you'd know their name was because they were in the community, right? Like they were somehow part of the early Christian movement. And so someone knew who they were and could drop their name to say, well, you might have encountered Jairus, right? Like you could go talk to him, or this is kind of the source that I got it from. And so some of those things are little clues of the authenticity of these stories. What else do you guys see?
My thing is, sometimes I think, because we're teaching comma method for the first time, and that a lot of my observations end up being questions.
Yes.
That as I'm reading this, I get questions coming to my mind, and I go, I wonder why. And so one of those questions that came up for me is, what made her think touching his clothes would heal her?
Yeah.
Because that hadn't happened in any other situation that Mark shares about. It doesn't seem like she's repeating something, that maybe there's supernatural insight or incredible faith, but it doesn't fit any current categories. So what drove her to be like, if I just touch the clothes, if I just get a piece of the robe, I'll be good?
Yeah. That's a really good question. You got to think, what would be going on in your mind? I'm trying to think if there's any like Old Testament stories where that was like how it was done. They touched something or whatever. And there may be some things, but nothing's immediately coming to mind. Or it could just be like a humility where you're like, because she clearly doesn't want to call attention to herself. Like even after the healing happens, she's hesitant, like she's afraid to come forward and say, it was me. But there's just a sense of like, look, I can't go like ask him for this, but maybe if I just got close enough, like maybe, I don't know, maybe God would hear that or whatever. You know what I mean? Like there's some intuitive sense of like, I don't know, I'm not worthy of the conversation or the direct thing, but if I could just, just grab a little on the and passing by, Yeah.
Well, and there was obviously desperation. Again, she had suffered a great deal. She had, spent all of her money. You get to a point where it's like, there has to be something that will work. And she's unclean, right?
Yeah.
She's been bleeding. She is unclean. Like people don't want to be around her. I've always imagined her like sneaking through the crowd and like, if I could just touch the hem of his garment. Like it's almost like there's a respect level there.
Yeah.
Of, I don't want to make Jesus unclean, but if I could just touch just the hem.
Yeah.
Like just the hem, maybe that would be enough.
We should probably unpack that a little bit, the idea of unclean. So if someone's new to reading the Bible, this might be a very unfamiliar kind of thing. It's probably in the footnote of a study Bible in this story. I did not specifically check, but my guess is it's there. But here's the notion of uncleanness. This is not a category we use all the time, although there's occasions like when we were during, the height of COVID stuff and people were feeling the like, what can I touch or how close can I get to someone or whatever, like that sense of contagion is kind of built into it. But it's less about illness. It's less about, disease kind of stuff. It's more about rituals. So there are certain things that, especially in the ancient world, if you were going to participate in a ritual, an act of worship or going into a temple or any of those sorts of things, which would have been, even for not Jews or any religious person, would say there are times when I need to be appropriate when coming into the kind of religious context. They would want to make sure they were clean. And it's almost a sense of like, you don't go into a fancy restaurant with mud on your clothes. You don't go to a wedding with, like grass stains or whatever. Like you go in appropriately. And so in the Jewish context, they had rules that said, if you're going to approach God and you want to go into a holy place, the thing you can't do is bring something unclean into a holy place. Now, it wasn't sinful. Like, it's not like you're sinful when you're unclean. It just means you're not ready to go to the holy part of your life, right? You can go to the common part of your life, the ordinary things, but if you were going to go to this holy place, you couldn't be unclean. And the way you became unclean were mostly through certain bodily functions, as well as coming in contact with certain things. So if you came in contact with a dead body, or you came in contact with something that was unclean in a certain way, you could become unclean, and you'd have to go through some sort of washing or whatever to get clean to go in that space. But for her, one of the things that makes you unclean is when you are bleeding. And there are various bodily functions that this happens. And so if she's got a disorder that makes it so that she's bleeding and can't resolve it, and that never comes to an end, it means she could never go participate. She could not offer a sacrifice. She could not join her family with those things. And when her family wanted to do that, or when her community wanted to do that, they would have to avoid her for a certain amount of time before going into that. That may have meant that she couldn't get married. That may have meant other things because this was a chronic thing. And so for her to go into a crowd is a massive deal.
Yeah.
Because those people are going to touch her. Like it emphasizes like pressing around and all sorts of stuff. And then she's going to touch someone who absolutely is going to be in a holy place, a religious leader. It's a bold move. It's a really bold move.
Yep.
What else you guys got?
Well, and the fact that Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it, right? Like she just slipped back in the crowd. She's like, okay, who feels it? But Jesus realizes the power's gone out from him. It's like, who touched my clothes? Or, this is where you're like, how did Jesus say that, right?
What tone of voice is weird? Yeah.
like, I don't know how he said it, right? But who touched my clothes? And they're like, people are crowding around you. Why are you asking who touched you?
Yeah.
Because he wanted to see her. Like, that's pretty cool.
When the last story we did he read some people's minds?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of those ones where I'm like, okay, Jesus, when are the powers working for you? You know what I mean? Like whatever superpowers you got going on, like you can read their minds, but like you're in the crowd looking for this person. I think we gave
him the same voice last time too. When we were like, what are they thinking?
What are they thinking? But yeah, there is something really cool about him looking for her and saying like, no, I'm not gonna move on from this. I need to know who this is.
Right. Yeah. Because he could have just let the healing happen and kept walking. But I think him turning and drawing attention to her is offering dignity that she probably didn't feel from most people because she was unclean. So people actively avoided her, and Jesus went to her and waited and wouldn't leave until he had a personal connection with her, which I think it's like Jesus is not a genie in a bottle. Like he's a personal friend.
Yeah.
And that's the difference about who our God is.
Yeah. The encounter matters. Yeah. I noticed something along those lines, that kind of personal lines. Did you notice the repeated word of daughter?
Yeah.
In this? And it's not just when they're talking about, well, Jairus' daughter. Well, that's who she was. No. But like Jesus addresses the woman as daughter. And there's Jesus doesn't call the little girl daughter, but he says Talitha cum, which is this like tender, like it's the sort of thing you say to your child. Like I don't know what adults would say to a kid on the street or whatever, like, oh, hey, little one or whatever. But like there's a tenderness to this, right? And even just the setting of like going to go up to her and almost like he's waking her up. Like there's just like a familial kindness and warmth to the whole thing. And even just the way he's saying like, how do I see these people that are needing my help? Like a dad sees them, you know, like there's something, that's part of one of the reasons this makes it one of my favorite stories.
It's like, one of my favorites too. I love the idea that there is a father concerned for his daughter. And then again, this delay happens and Jesus calls her daughter. Like, every bit of me. I love it. It's just a beautiful statement. I mean, the next repeated daughter is your daughter is dead, though.
Yes.
So there's an observation right there. They come up and they're like, hey, your daughter's dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. I noticed that word bother in that sentence too.
Yep.
And it's the idea is like you're annoying him now, right? Like like he could have helped, and I guess he was willing to come, and that was already kind of taking up his time or whatever. Don't annoy him. He doesn't need this, right? And there's there is an underlying sense of like there's a rush. And then there's an interruption that's annoying, and then it's like too much. Like there is the sort of contrast with the way Jesus slows down and talks to people.
Yes.
With the sense of like urgency and interruption and annoyance and like the sort of thing, honestly, like this would have driven me crazy. Like I'm not good with the interruptions, right?
Yep.
And Jesus, like there is present in all the moments,
Yeah. That was one of my observations I wrote was, again, he used the word bothered, but I said Jesus is so unbothered and so unhurried in this, in both, in this whole sequence of events. When the emotional temperature of the room is spiking and it's so high and everything is intense around him, like this crowd, he's just so cool and calm and just almost at rest in this moment, which is so just striking, honestly, to think about Jesus just strolling through this crowd, but not hurried at all.
Yeah.
He also seems to really care for this woman and this little girl, for their reputations.
What do you mean?
In the ways that he publicly wants to see this woman who has not been able to enter the temple. And he says in a very public way to a crowd, like, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering.
Yeah.
And then this little girl who, if she was dead, well, then she's unclean, right? You can't come in contact with a dead body. And so he says, she's only asleep. And then he only takes Peter, James, and John in. And he's like, don't tell anybody about this. Like, because nobody, like, she's 12, right? Nobody wants to take the dead girl,
to the middle school dance.
Yeah, to the dance. Right? It's true.
No one wants to take the zombie girl to a dance.
It's true. And so it's like,
oh my gosh,
don't tell anybody about this. Get her the mac and cheese, and we're good.
Oh my gosh,
that's interesting.
Maybe I'm reading too far into that.
Okay, so I do want to explore the question though. There
is
is definitely something going on there where he's managing how this stuff is perceived. That's you know what I mean, and definitely the dignity with the woman. And there's something going on with the way he's like handling this situation with the kid. But I'm wondering about that because 2 times he says he doesn't let anybody follow him except for Peter, James, and John, and then at the end it says, strict orders, don't tell anyone about this. And this is an observation that comes from more than just this story, but there are a lot of stories in the book of Mark here where he tells people don't say something, which, like, if you've been around our church for a while, we're always like, tell somebody about Jesus. Like, if Jesus did something for you, you should do it and do it publicly and like do it now, like we're like, be evangelistic, like tell somebody about Jesus. So Jesus himself is like, don't tell anybody about me. Like that. That's not the message, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what do you think's going on? Like, why is he trying to keep some things quiet here? He's got a crowd outside the door. He literally could walk out and be like, I would like you to meet this dead girl, no longer dead. Who do you think I am?
Yeah.
Where's your faith now, people?
Yeah. I'm glad you're referencing this because even as a Christian for many years, these moments where he's like, it's not time yet. Like, it's not time for the fact that I'm the Savior, I'm the Messiah to be revealed. And the question of God's timing, I think it goes in line with this passage, what I was saying. Like, he was so unhurried and unbothered. He's also just not in a rush to say, like, hey, I'm the Messiah. Like, here I am to save all of humanity. There are times when he says this very publicly. He takes the scroll and says, but there are other audiences that he chooses not to. And he just never succumbs to the public pressure. He's just not in a hurry.
Yeah. There are scholars who will talk about that. Scholars always have a name for everything. So they call this the Markan secret. And it's because it's in other gospels, but it's especially in Mark where he just says, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't say anything. And it seems the leading idea is that what he's doing is managing the timing of when people really know that he's the Messiah, so that they don't preemptively make something happen that needs to happen later, right? Like, so if he just announced it, well, guess what? He gets killed faster, right? Or they try to make him king, or they misunderstand what he's about because they need long enough to see, like, wait, he's talking about the kingdom, but it's a different kind of kingdom, or those kinds of things. And there's actually a moment that's coming up later. I don't know when we read it, but where he turns to the disciples while they're in private and being like, okay, who do you guys think I am? Right? Like, we've been keeping it a secret, but you guys have seen it. What do you think? You know? And there is a sense of like, he's revealing it in a controlled way. You know what I mean? So there's probably something there that's just the reality of don't blab it, you know?
Yeah.
Anything else you guys see in the passage?
Again, just another question of just why does Jesus only let Peter, James, and John follow him? Because there are other times we see Jesus picks these three guys and he says, hey, you three. Like, I'm just thinking if I'm one of the other 9 disciples, I'm like, them again? You know? Like, is Jesus showing favoritism? What's going on?
Thaddeus is like, I'm not going to get into any stories.
No, Thaddeus.
No, Thaddeus, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Thaddeus. Yeah, it's weird. I noticed the kind of like big punchline, right? Like, your faith has healed you. Let me find this here. And then
Verse 34.
You're go in peace, freed from yourself. Your faith has healed you. Okay, there it is. And then he says in 36 a similar thing. Don't be afraid, just believe. Like, there's this emphasis on believe in faith. Same word in Greek. Just believe. And so there's like this emphasis on: do you actually trust me? Do you believe that I can do this? Do you have a sense of like, this is the guy who can solve the problem with Jesus? And it's not because they're like, you know what, you were really worthy, you know, like the lady who touches her, or the girl who's dead, or Jairus, or anybody.
Yeah.
It's like, do you trust me? You know, is like where the emphasis lies.
Yeah. Well, and the difference between who he's saying it to, right? Like, here's again this woman who is desperate and hasn't been able to participate in anything, and yet she has faith, and he says, your faith has healed you. And then he looks at Jairus, who's like an administrator in a temple, and says, don't be afraid, just believe. So there's a little bit of, you know, who he's even saying it to. Interesting.
I'm going to put you on the spot, but I have this memory of there's another translation of belief and faith in God that you could translate it as relax.
Relax.
Yeah. Have you heard this before?
I've not heard that before.
Okay.
I mean, it would be an appropriate, at least paraphrase, you know what I mean? In some context where you say, because it's like there's like the classic illustration of like, here's a chair. Do you think it could hold you up? Oh yeah, I think it could hold you up. But real faith isn't like thinking the chair could hold you up, but like sitting in it enough to be like, okay, I'm gonna let it hold my weight, right? Like there's can you relax into this to let it do its thing? Is kind of like that feels right to me. You know?
Sure. Yeah. I was just thinking about in terms of this, he's like, you know, he said, hey, don't be afraid, just relax. You know, just believe, just relax in me and just sit back like on the chair. Just trust in this chair.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and he tells the woman to go in peace. Go in peace.
Go in peace.
Like, I don't think that's just a physical peace.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to that. Like the woman for 12 years has found no solution. And I'm sure she's prayed. You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And to finally have someone say, your faith has healed you. Like, no, I see your faith. Like it's like it, because I'm sure she's thinking there's something wrong with me that I'm not getting this solved, right? He's saying, no, your faith. I see it. You know, that's really cool. Oh, here's the place where I find it challenging. I want to hear what you guys think about this. This phrase in 36, he says, "Don't be afraid, just believe." I could easily see someone taking that and saying, "Well, is that the solution to all the problems?" Right? Like so. Right? Like out of context, in a different context, you say, well, don't be afraid, just believe. Well, how do I know when that applies? I've known lots of people who have died and they didn't come back, right? And I've known lots of people who are sick and they didn't get healed. Like, how do you like wrestle with that with somebody?
Yeah, because how many times has that been abused? Where someone just said, oh, you just have to believe, like in the middle of a cancer trial. It's like, it's like some people die of cancer. Like that's really tragic. The one thing I think that's important to remember, that first part, I don't know that they're separated. Like the idea of don't be afraid, like the idea of do not fear. That phrase is one of the most repeated commands, if not the most repeated command in all of Scripture. Do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. Because I think what fear is almost like idolizing control. If I can grab control of this situation, then everything will be okay. And so when we feel like things are slipping out of our control, that's when we go to fear, because we almost think too highly of ourselves. And so there's almost this invitation of just stop trying to control everything. Stop trying to be God. Stop trying to be the supreme being over this thing, and trust that there's someone else in control. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's hard about that is you've almost, like when someone says, well, if I have faith, then I'm going to get healed, or if I have faith, then I'm going to get pregnant, or if I have faith, I'm going to get the job, or whatever the thing is that you feel like is not happening for you. It's what you are trying to do with the faith is like, well, if I just do it, I'll be in control again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
That the very thing that we're putting it into God's hands is saying, I'm not in control, even of the outcome of this, right?
Yeah.
And to say, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to trust what comes from the hand of this guy who loves me, right?
Yeah.
Who sees me as daughter.
Yeah.
You know, that's the hard thing. That faith is effective. Like it's what leads to the good stuff. But sometimes that faith also means I'm not going to determine the outcome. I'm just going to trust, right? That's wild.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to one of the M's in comma. Let's talk about meditation this time. We can do these in either order, meditation or message first, but we're going to do meditation this time. And here's a thing I like to do with stories, narratives in the Bible, is when you do meditation, to actually do some imagining, right? To say, if I was one character in the story, what would I experience? And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to give you 45 seconds, which is not enough, okay? If you're, an imaginer, you're probably going to need to pause it and just spend your time doing it. But even if just for 45 seconds, you practice it, this is what I want you to do. I want you to pick a character. It might be Jairus, might be the woman in the crowd. It might be a disciple. It might be, one of the people who is, coming to say to Jairus, whatever. I wouldn't necessarily pick the dead girl. I think, if you're going to imagine what it's like to be her,
then you get to sleep.
It's like, I just woke up and then they gave me food. And so maybe you want to do that. But to slow down and say, I'm going to think through or read through the story and say, if I was in that person's shoes, what would I see? What would I hear? What would I feel? Like, what emotions might there be? What would be going on around me? And to slow down and see what that's like. So we'll give you a little moment to do just that. All right, let's talk about the other M in comma. Let's talk about message here. And message is where we take some of the things we observed and we formulate a principle that we can then apply to our lives. So what message did you guys get out of this?
Well, my message was to believe for the end of the story. I think that it's that don't be afraid, just believe piece, but the idea that there's so many interruptions that maybe you would just write the end of the story a different way, but to just keep believing for the end of it. There's more to come.
All right, my message is Jesus rejects hurry and invites us to a slower pace.
That's good. Yeah, definitely demonstrates that. All right, my message is this. The fatherly heart of Jesus always has time for his daughters. All right, let's talk about application, the A in comma. All right, what are you going to do in light of this?
All right, so my message was Jesus rejects hurry and invites us to a slower pace. This made me think of one of my favorite writers, Dallas Willard. He wrote a bunch of different books, but he has this famous quote where he said, "Hurry is the great enemy of the spiritual life in our day. you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And so as I was thinking about Jesus slowing everything down in the chaos of the situation, I was thinking that's what Jesus is doing in this moment. And so I think my application is to ruthlessly eliminate hurry and walk with Jesus at his pace. Because often I'm trying to get Jesus to match my pace. I'm like, hey, it's time to go. We need to speed up this process, Jesus. Like when you're talking about connecting with someone in the story, I'm like, I immediately connect with Jairus because I've got a daughter who's got medical issues, who's sick all the time. And I can't even count how many times I've pleaded with God for healing for her in very specific moments in the hospital and other moments. And I'm like, okay, Jesus, it's time to go ahead, bring that healing now. She's ready. She's there. And just thinking about Jairus waiting in that crowd, like kind of twiddling his thumbs, like, okay, Jesus, I know this woman needs your help, but can we get going? And then your servant's coming up and saying it's too late. My heart sinks reading that as a dad and thinking about the emotions of that and just inside wanting to hurry Jesus up and kind of usher him out of that crowd, but realizing, hey, Jesus is in control this whole time, and his pace is actually better than mine. And even if I don't understand, it's a good thing to slow down, to be fully present in the moment that God has us in.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I feel like my message and my application are kind of similar because it truly is believing for the end of the story. Like how often do I write the story in my head that hasn't been written? And I tell people this all the time, right? That story hasn't been written. Let's back off and like believe that God could do something different than all the catastrophes that I can think of in my head. So it's a harder application for me because I like an application that I can like do right now. And I feel like this is one of those applications that I have to catch myself in the moment of. The times when I'm just kind of like, I got this. I'm writing the end of this, but instead to say, no, there is something good at the end of this. All the goodness is at the end of this. And so to believe in the moment of it and to kind of wipe away those fears and my need to rush in and fill in all the blanks, like kind of taking that step back.
Yeah. So my message was that the fatherly heart of Jesus always has time for his daughters. And I kept daughters there because of the word daughter in the text, and I just really like that. And I'm a dad of daughters, so I feel it. So maybe my application should be like give each of my daughters some good quality dad time. But I don't think that's what it's about.
That's good.
They have a lot to say about what you do.
They do.
So.
They have some opinions about my job. So, but I think what really the application is to be bold in going to our Father, right? Like there's, and going to Jesus. I know he's not the Father, but he has a fatherly heart. There's like bringing your needs with confidence. Like, so I think about the woman in the crowd, and she doesn't know. She's just thinking, I'm desperate, and I think this guy can help, and anything is worth trying, right? And that's enough for Jesus. He doesn't need you to be like, I got this, right? Like that's enough. And yet, when you know what his heart is like, you can be bold in saying, Jesus, I need this, right? Like, I would rather my daughters come to me and say, here's what I need, Dad. I really need you to help me, than try to hint, right? It would be enough. Like, if I picked up that they needed it, I would be willing to help. But the relationship I would love to have is that they say, I know that you love me, and I don't need to be ashamed of any of my needs. I don't have to worry that you're going to like not care about that. But I can come to you and just say, Dad, this is what I need. What can you do? And I can trust you with it. And so that should be my attitude with God. Just say, here's what's going on. I don't know what you're going to do with this, but I'm going to just come straight up and say, here's what it is. And not just when I'm desperate, but just anytime, right? And so I think there's something, once you know the heart of Jesus, that gets you to that place.
Yeah, speak with clarity. Tell God if he really is your Father. That's so good.
Yeah. All right. I think that's it.
All right. Thanks for hanging out with us. Join us again next Monday for a new episode where we'll be looking at another passage from the Bible Savvy reading schedule. And in the meantime, if you're not following along with the reading plan, check out BibleSavvy.com. Also, you can subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Email us your questions or suggestions at podcast@BibleSavvy.com. Lastly, tell your friends, and we'll talk to you next week.